Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure you're part of our journey. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and get ready for a story that will leave you thinking. And if you love inspiring tales, a like goes a long way. That relic belongs in a museum, not in your mansion. The archaeologist's trembling words hung in the air as laughter rippled through the auction hall. 70 years of searching, decades of academic dedication, all reduced to mockery among crystal chandeliers and champagne flutes. The auctioneer's smirk cut deeper than any excavation tool Dr. Harmon had ever wielded. The Winfield Estate ballroom gleamed with old money and new power. Diamonds caught the light from necks that had never bent in labor. 300 elite collectors perched on velvet chairs, numbered paddles resting in manicured hands. The ancient Mayan calendar stone sat illuminated on its pedestal, its intricate carvings seemingly alive under perfectly positioned spotlights, the very artifact Dr. Harmon had discovered in a forgotten cave 40 years earlier. Security guards moved toward the aging archaeologist, their earpieces buzzing with instructions. Dr. Harmon's weathered hands trembled as they reached toward the stone, muscle memory from decades in the field. In the back of the room, a figure in a tailored black suit slowly stood. The auction's trajectory was about to change forever, though nobody knew it yet, except perhaps Johnny Depp, whose eyes narrowed as he reached for his checkbook. If this moment made you feel something, imagine what's coming next. Hit that like button and stay with us. Subscribe now. Dr. Ellis Harmon had devoted his entire life to archaeology, sacrificing family, fortune, and physical comfort for the pursuit of historical truth. His knuckles were permanently stained with decades of soil, his skin weathered from excavations across 5 continents. That Mayan calendar stone had been his greatest discovery, uncovered in a remote Yucatan cave system, after 3 colleagues had abandoned the expedition. For 40 years, he'd studied its inscriptions, published 27 papers on its significance, and fought tirelessly to ensure it would be accessible to researchers, not locked away in private collections. I believe the starting bid for Lot 37 begins at $1 million, announced Reginald Winchester, the auction house director, adjusting his silver cufflinks as he spoke. The polished English accent added gravitas to his words as he glanced dismissively at Dr. Harmon. I must remind all attendees that only registered bidders are permitted to remain in the auction room during active bidding. The message was clear. The professor didn't belong. Security personnel in black suits moved closer to Dr. Harmon's position, their earpieces glinting under the chandeliers. The room smelled of expensive perfume, aged cognac, and the unmistakable scent of money. "Please, just a moment," Dr. Harmon pleaded, his voice breaking. "That artifact contains astronomical calculations we still haven't fully decoded. It belongs to humanity's shared heritage." His worn tweed jacket hung loosely on his thinning frame as he stepped forward. A woman in a diamond necklace worth more than his lifetime academic salary whispered to her companion, not bothering to lower her voice. How did they even let him in? Titters of laughter followed. Dr. Harmon's cheeks flushed red, but his eyes remained fixed on the stone. The security guards reached him now, one placing a firm hand on his elbow. "Sir, we need you to exit the premises." The guard's tone was professionally neutral, but left no room for negotiation. Smartphone cameras turned toward the commotion, wealthy patrons capturing the moment for their private amusement. Winchester smiled thinly from the podium, cleared his throat, and continued as if nothing had happened. "As I was saying, $1 million for this exquisite piece of pre-Columbian history. Do I hear 1.2? Paddles began to rise around the room, the bidding war commencing while Dr. Harmon struggled against the guard's grip. "I've spent my life studying that artifact," Dr. Harmon's voice cracked as he was pulled toward the exit. "You can't just lock it away where no one will learn from it." The bidding escalated rapidly, echoing through the ornate hall like artillery fire. 2 million, 2.5, 3 million. Each number hammered another nail into Dr. Harmon's academic aspirations. The calendar stone, with its secrets still partially undeciphered, would disappear into some billionaire's private collection, beyond the reach of scientific study. Dr. Harmon's shoulders slumped in defeat as the security guard firmly guided him toward the service exit, away from the glamorous main doors where valets stood attending to Bentleys and Maseratis. "We're at $5 million, Winchester announced with barely concealed glee, his commission growing with each bid. "Going once." The paddles continued to rise. $5.5 million for Mr. Takahashi. The Japanese industrialist in the front row nodded curtly, his face impassive. $6 million from Mrs. Rothwell. A woman with platinum hair raised her paddle, not even looking up from her phone. The artifact's value as a status symbol had utterly eclipsed its historical significance. In the back of the room, Johnny Depp had remained standing, silently observing the scene unfold. His eyes moved from the desperate archaeologist to the smug auctioneer, taking in every detail. Unlike the others, he wasn't dressed to impress. His black suit bore his signature casual elegance, and his presence commanded attention without demanding it. Something in his expression had changed, a silent determination replacing his usual laid-back demeanor. As Dr. Harmon was pushed through the side door, Depp's hand slowly raised. "Things are about to take a turn. Don't miss what happens next. Subscribe, like our video, and keep watching." $10 million. Depp's voice cut through the room like a velvet knife, quiet yet impossible to ignore. The auction hall fell silent. Winchester's practiced smile faltered momentarily as heads turned toward the source of the bid. The actor stood relaxed but with unmistakable purpose, his gaze steady beneath the brim of his fedora. He hadn't used a paddle. He didn't need one. His mere presence had shifted the atmosphere from self-congratulatory to uncertain in an instant. Winchester recovered quickly, professional mask back in place. $10 million from Mr. Depp, he announced, unable to keep a note of excitement from his voice. Celebrity participation would make tomorrow's headlines, increasing the auction house's profile. "Do I hear 10.5? The previous bidders exchanged glances, reassessing their positions now that a Hollywood star had entered the fray. Takahashi raised his paddle hesitantly. 10.5 from Mr. Takahashi. Depp nodded, almost imperceptibly, and raised a single finger. 11 million, Winchester translated, his voice rising slightly. The room buzzed with whispers. Smartphones appeared from designer clutches and bespoke suit pockets. The story was no longer just about an ancient artifact. It was about Johnny Depp buying one. The security guards had paused at the side door, Doctor. Harmon still in their grip, but momentarily forgotten as everyone's attention focused on the unexpected bidder. 11.5, called Mrs. Rothwell, her previous disinterest replaced by keen determination. She turned fully in her chair to assess her new competition. Her husband, a tech billionaire known for his ruthless acquisition strategies, whispered urgently in her ear. For them, outbidding a celebrity would be its own victory, regardless of the artifact. 12 million. Depp countered without hesitation, his voice carrying the same casual confidence he brought to his film roles. He had moved forward now, making his way slowly down the center aisle. Each step was deliberate, drawing all eyes in the room. The security guards exchanged uncertain glances. Should they continue removing the archaeologist or address this disruption to the auction's careful choreography? Dr. Harmon watched in bewilderment, his tired eyes widening as he recognized the actor. 12.5. Takahashi responded, his competitive spirit fully engaged. His assistant whispered urgently in his ear, likely advising caution, but the industrialist waved him off. Winchester's eyes gleamed with dollar signs as he surveyed the room. $12.5 million from Mr. Takahashi. Do I hear 13? The auctioneer looked expectantly at Depp, who had stopped halfway down the aisle, equidistant between the podium and the side door where Dr. Harmon stood detained. 13 million, Depp confirmed with a slight nod. Then, breaking all auction protocol, he turned to address the room. Though I have to wonder why we're all so eager to lock away a piece of history that this man, he gestured toward Dr. Harmon, has spent his life trying to understand. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Winchester rapped his gavel sharply. Mr. Depp, please refrain from commentary during active bidding. Depp smiled, the same disarming smile that had charmed audiences for decades. Just adding some context to my bid. He reached into his jacket and withdrew a folded newspaper clipping, holding it up for the room to see. Dr. Ellis Harmon, recipient of the Fieldworth Medal for his contributions to Mesoamerican archaeology. The man who discovered this very artifact in 1983. Winchester's composure cracked visibly as he struggled to maintain control. This is highly irregular, Mr. Depp. We must proceed with 15 million, Depp interrupted smoothly. The room gasped collectively. It wasn't just the jump in price that shocked them. It was the deliberate disruption of the auction's genteel veneer. And I'd like to know how this artifact left Dr. Harmon's university to end up here. He continued his slow walk toward the podium, phones recording his every move. The wealthy audience, accustomed to being the center of attention, now found themselves mere spectators to Depp's performance. Mrs. Rothwell conferred urgently with her husband, then shook her head. Takahashi remained still, calculator eyes assessing whether the artifact's value as a conversation piece could possibly justify exceeding 15 million. The silence stretched uncomfortably as Winchester waited for another bid. $15 million for the Mayan calendar stone, going once. He hesitated, scanning the room hopefully. Dr. Harmon watched in astonishment, his weathered face a canvas of conflicting emotions: hope, confusion, disbelief. The security guard's grip on his arms had loosened, uncertain of how to proceed now that their charge had become central to the auction drama. One guard touched his earpiece, receiving new instructions. The auctioneer raised his gavel. Going twice. Depp had reached the front row now, standing directly before the illuminated artifact. He reached out, not quite touching the stone, his fingers hovering reverently over its ancient surface. Dr. Harmon, he called without turning, his voice carrying through the hushed room. Would you mind joining me up here? I believe your expertise might be valuable in determining whether 15 million is a fair price for humanity's heritage. This story is only getting deeper. What would you do in this situation? Comment below, and let's talk. A tense silence enveloped the room. Winchester's face flushed crimson as he hissed into his microphone. Security, please escort Mr. Depp back to his seat. But nobody moved. The security team looked to their earpieces for guidance, receiving conflicting instructions as the auction house management scrambled to handle this unprecedented situation. $15 million was not a sum to dismiss lightly, regardless of protocol violations. I'd be honored, Doctor. Harmon called back, his voice stronger now. The guard's grip fell away completely as the archaeologist straightened his posture and walked with renewed dignity toward the front of the room. The crowd parted unconsciously, creating a path. Decades of fieldwork had left the professor's gait slightly uneven, but there was nothing infirm in his movement now. Every eye tracked his progress as he joined Depp beside the artifact pedestal. "This stone," Dr. Harmon began, his academic's voice carrying surprising authority in the hushed room, "contains astronomical calculations so precise that they predicted solar events centuries in advance." His trembling hand gestured to specific carved symbols. "These glyphs here describe a solar alignment that NASA only confirmed with modern technology in 2017. The artifact, once merely an expensive curiosity to most attendees, transformed before their eyes into something more significant as the professor spoke." Depp nodded appreciatively, then turned to address Winchester. $15 million seems inadequate for such a treasure, doesn't it?" His voice was conversational but carried easily across the silent room. "Especially when you consider that Dr. Harmon here hasn't been able to complete his research." Phones continued recording, capturing every word. "I'm curious, how exactly did this artifact leave academic custody and end up at auction?" Winchester's professional mask slipped completely, revealing naked discomfort. "The provenance documents are available for review by serious bidders only," he said stiffly. "But I assure you, everything is in perfect order." He attempted to regain control. "Now, if we could continue with the bidding." "I've reviewed those documents," came a new voice. A woman in her 40s with a severe bun and practical suit stood up from the middle of the audience. "Emily Thornton, Cultural Heritage Protection Division." She held up credentials that made Winchester blanch visibly. "And there are significant questions about how Northwick University lost possession of this artifact after Dr. Harmon's expedition." The crowd shifted uncomfortably, the exclusive auction suddenly feeling less exclusive and more exposed. Depp smiled at this unexpected ally. "It seems 15 million might be premature then." He turned to Dr. Harmon. "Professor, in your professional opinion, where should this artifact be housed?" Dr. Harmon stood straighter, emboldened by this extraordinary turn of events. "This piece should be in a museum with research access, where its knowledge can benefit everyone. Its astronomical calculations could help us understand how ancient civilizations tracked celestial movements with such precision." His voice grew stronger with each word. "I've spent my career trying to decode its secrets, not to own them, but to share them with humanity." The room had transformed. What began as a sterile transaction among the ultra-wealthy had become something else entirely. A public reckoning about cultural heritage, academic access, and the responsibilities of wealth. Mrs. Rothwell's husband whispered urgently in her ear again, but this time with visible concern rather than competitive strategy. Takahashi studied his auction catalog with sudden, intense interest, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Other bidders shifted in their seats, aware that they were being recorded not just as auction participants, but as characters in a morality tale that might play out across social media within hours. Winchester attempted one last desperate grasp at control. "This is a legitimate auction of a legally acquired artifact, and I must insist, $20 million, Johnny Depp announced, his voice cutting through the tension. The room froze again. He reached into his jacket, producing a checkbook and pen with theatrical flair. "With one condition." He turned to face the audience fully now, camera phones capturing his every expression. "The artifact is donated to the Natural History Museum in Dr. Harmon's name, with a permanent research position established for him and his team." A spontaneous burst of applause erupted from the back of the room where the auction house staff stood. It spread awkwardly through parts of the audience, creating islands of approval amid seas of uncomfortable silence. Winchester stood paralyzed behind his podium, the gavel limp in his hand. Emily Thornton nodded in satisfaction, making notes in an official-looking portfolio. "I dot." Dr. Harmon's voice caught with emotion. He removed his glasses, wiping them with a handkerchief as he collected himself. "Mr. Depp, I don't know what to say. Depp placed a hand on the older man's shoulder. You don't need to say anything, Doctor. Your work speaks for itself. He turned back to Winchester. I believe we have a deal. $20 million, payable immediately, with the stated condition. The actor's casual demeanor had been replaced by something altogether more formidable. The quiet authority of someone using their power purposefully. Winchester looked to the auction house owner in the wings, who gave a reluctant nod. 20 million once, Winchester announced mechanically. 20 million, twice. He scanned the silent room, finding no challengers. The gavel fell with a hollow crack that echoed through the hall. Sold to Mr. Johnny Depp, with the stated condition. It's not over yet. The best part is coming. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it. As the reality of what had just transpired settled over the room, the atmosphere transformed yet again. Staff hurried to process Mr. Depp's payment, while security, now reoriented to their purpose, formed a protective circle around the artifact and its new steward. The wealthy patrons began to disperse, some leaving swiftly to avoid the cameras, others lingering to witness the conclusion of this unprecedented auction. The Rothwells departed without a backward glance, while Takahashi approached Depp with a respectful bow before exiting. Dr. Harmon stood beside the calendar stone, his fingers hovering above its surface with the practiced restraint of a conservator. Do you know how many nights I've dreamed about continuing this research? He asked, speaking more to himself than anyone else. There are alignments here that correspond to astronomical events centuries into our future. The Maya weren't just tracking time, they were encoding mathematical principles we're only beginning to understand. Emily Thornton approached with purposeful steps, her portfolio tucked under her arm. Dr. Harmon, we'll need your expertise during our investigation into how the artifact was removed from university custody. She offered her card. And Mr. Depp, my department will be in touch regarding the transfer details to the Natural History Museum. They'll be ecstatic, of course. Depp nodded, signing the final papers with a flourish, just doing what needed to be done. He glanced toward Winchester, who was being berated in hushed tones by the auction house owner in a corner. Some treasures belong to everyone or no one at all. The actor's words carried just far enough to be captured by the nearest phones, ensuring they would accompany the video footage spreading rapidly across social media platforms. 3 weeks later, the Natural History Museum's Grand Hall buzzed with activity. A special exhibition had been organized around the Mayan calendar stone, now displayed in a custom-designed case that allowed 360-degree viewing. Plaques detailed both its historical significance and the dramatic story of its return to public access. School groups moved through in organized clusters, professors led specialized tours, and curious members of the public lined up for their chance to view the artifact that had become famous not just for its archaeological importance, but for the Hollywood intervention that had saved it. Dr. Harmon stood before a group of graduate students, his weathered hands animating his explanation of the stone's unique features. He wore a new tweed jacket and a museum ID badge that identified him as Senior Research Fellow. For the first time in decades, he looked his age rather than beyond it, revitalized by the opportunity to continue his life's work. And here, he pointed to a specific glyph, is where we're making new discoveries about their mathematical approach to celestial mechanics. In a quieter corner of the exhibit, a short video played on loop, showing highlights from the auction and subsequent press conference. Johnny Depp's voice narrated over footage of the stone being carefully transported to its new home. Cultural heritage shouldn't be locked away in private collections. Knowledge belongs to everyone, and those who dedicate their lives to uncovering it deserve our respect and support. The clip ended with Depp and Dr. Harmon standing side by side at the exhibition opening, the actor deliberately stepping back to let the archaeologist address the cameras. The exhibition's guest book filled with comments from visitors moved by both the artifact and its story. "Inspired to continue my archaeology studies after seeing Dr. Harmon's dedication," wrote one university student. "Thank you, Johnny Depp, for showing that fame can be used for something meaningful," added another. The museum reported record attendance, with many visitors specifically mentioning the calendar stone story in their feedback. Online, the incident had sparked broader conversations about cultural heritage, wealth inequality, and the ethics of private ownership of historically significant artifacts. Clips of Depp's confrontation with the auction house had been viewed hundreds of millions of times, inspiring memes, thoughtful editorials, and even classroom discussions about the responsibilities that come with wealth and influence. Several billionaire collectors, sensing the shift in public opinion, had quietly begun donating artifacts from their private collections to museums. Dr. Harmon sat alone with the stone one evening after closing hours, the museum silent around him. His research team had gone home, but he'd stayed behind, making notes under the specialized lighting. He placed his palm flat against the protective glass, as close as he could come to touching the artifact that had defined his career, and now, thanks to an unexpected ally, would define his legacy as well. In the reflection, he could see both the ancient past and his own weathered face, time spanning across millennia through human dedication to knowledge. At the museum entrance, Johnny Depp's final quote had been etched beside the exhibition title. "Some treasures aren't meant to be owned, they're meant to be shared. True value isn't found in possessing something rare, but in allowing it to enlighten us all." Below it, visitors had spontaneously begun leaving notes of appreciation, creating an impromptu shrine to the power of doing what's right, regardless of convention. Wow, what a story! If this moved you, imagine what else we have for you. Hit that like button, drop a comment, and let us know what you think.